It's easy to feel drawn in by the smooth, honeyed voice of Keith Whitley on songs like Don't Close Your Eyes or When You Say Nothing at All. There's that gentle intensity in his delivery, something that feels close and honest. In those few minutes of music, you can hear a lifetime's worth of heartbreak and longing. And behind every syllable of that voice, behind every stage performance that enthralled thousands, was a fragile human being. He was a man shaped by the complexities of life in rural Kentucky, raised on the harmonies of Appalachia, and thrust into the whirling spotlight of Nashville. Before the hits, he was just a boy with a dream, strumming his way onto local stages, forging bonds with other aspiring musicians, and absorbing the generations of music that came before him. To fully appreciate Keith Whitley's music, you have to feel the soil under his feet and the notes in his heart. Let's start by picturing the environment in which he was raised. The rolling hills of Kentucky, where the Appalachian Mountains sprawl across the land, carry a distinct rhythm of life. Small towns are connected by winding roads and traditions that run deep. In these enclaves, people grow up listening to a cross-section of bluegrass, country, gospel, and folk tunes. They hear the banjo's bright pluck, the fiddle's mournful cry, and the sacred ring of tight vocal harmonies. And the music isn't just for entertainment. It's woven into community get-togethers, living room pick-and parties, and church gatherings. Born in 1954 in Sandy Hook, a small Kentucky town with a population barely touching a few hundred, he was introduced early to music. Childhood days were often spent in the thick of these rural gatherings, where guitars and fiddles served as the heartbeats of local social life. Imagine nights lit only by porch lights and the melodic swirl of voices harmonizing into the warm, southern air. For a child with a natural gift for melody, it must have felt like destiny. Whitley thrived on the energy of live music and recognized from a young age that these songs captured something essential about life: heartache, resilience, faith, and love. This was also the era when the older generation of country and bluegrass legends, like Roy Acuff, Bill Monroe, and the Stanley Brothers, still influenced everything around them. Their records spun on radio stations across Appalachia. Teens might have flirted with rock and roll in bigger cities, but out in the hills, those high, lonesome harmonies were still potent. It's no surprise then that Keith Whitley began honing his craft from a very young age. The desire to stand in front of a microphone, to pour his heart into a melody, was something that felt as natural to him as breathing. By the time Keith was a teenager, he'd already met another rising talent, Ricky Skaggs. They would go on to form an extraordinary friendship and musical partnership that left local audiences spellbound. Even as kids, the two impressed crowds with their mastery of bluegrass music. People watched these boys picking and singing with a sophistication beyond their years, an almost eerie fusion of youthful energy and advanced musicianship. Whether they were playing at small contests or local clubs, it was clear to anyone with ears that they weren't just good for their age, they were good, period. Yet lurking in the background was the reality of small-town life, complete with boisterous fun, late-night drives on winding roads, and the occasional brush with danger. One of the hair-raising early anecdotes about Whitley involves a near-fatal car accident when he was riding with Ricky Skaggs. They were young, they were in love with life, they were maybe a little reckless, and the roads in eastern Kentucky can be unforgiving. Miraculously, they survived the crash, shaken but alive. That brush with mortality, even if it didn't dramatically change the path of their youth, served as a jolt of reality. For Keith, it was a reminder that life is fragile. As the 1970s unrolled, the outlaw spirit was sweeping through country music. Legends like Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and David Allan Coe were rewriting the rules of Nashville. They infused their songs with grit, honesty, and a sense of rebellion. Meanwhile, in the world of bluegrass, the echoes of pioneers still stood strong, but a new generation was forging their path. Keith Whitley found himself straddling these two realms, the pure traditions of bluegrass and the evolving, increasingly commercial face of country. At 15, Whitley performed with Ralph Stanley and the Clinch Mountain Boys, a big deal for a kid from Sandy Hook. Ralph Stanley was one of the giants of bluegrass, revered for a soulful, haunting voice and unshakable authenticity. To share the stage with someone like Stanley wasn't just a step up for Keith, it was a leap into the major leagues of a genre he'd cherished since childhood. This experience wasn't easy, of course. The rigorous touring schedules and late-night performances could wear on even the most energetic teen. But Whitley soaked it all in, refined his stage presence, and learned how to blend the distinctive rhythmic drive of bluegrass with his own interpretive style. He was a quick study, picking up pointers from seasoned musicians who traveled with him. While many young people move swiftly through phases, Whitley's dedication to perfection was unwavering. He wanted to know every chord, every subtle harmony, every flourish that could turn a simple number into an unforgettable performance. Older members of the band marveled at how intensely he focused on the music, how he'd ask nuanced questions about timing, chord progressions, or arrangement. In these early years, he was setting the foundation for a versatility that would allow him to move seamlessly into mainstream country stardom later on. But life on the road also has its temptations. For a young man eager to prove himself, sometimes stepping into adult vices seems like a rite of passage. Drinking culture was hardly alien to country and bluegrass tours. The lifestyle involved long nights, the euphoria of performing, then the come-down afterward. A few drinks would dull the exhaustion or amplify the fun, depending on the situation. Gradually, Whitley, still a teenager, developed a precarious relationship with alcohol. It didn't become a dire problem overnight, but its seeds were planted early, nurtured by an environment that normalized partying as part of the job. Despite that undercurrent, the 70s brought leaps in Whitley's career. He recorded with J.D. Crowe in the New South, an innovative bluegrass outfit that was modernizing the genre. Fans who discovered him through those recordings noted his impressive range, his emotional nuance, and the fact that his singing, even then, carried the weight of someone who'd lived far more life than his actual years. People were starting to say that Keith Whitley's voice had an almost sorrowful beauty to it, as though he could channel the heartbreak of generations in a single note. That sorrowful magic was balanced by an affable personality off stage. He could be quick-witted, lively, and kind-hearted. He enjoyed sharing stories, laughing with fellow musicians, and stepping back to let others shine when they deserved it. He wasn't an egomaniac. Folks who encountered him in those days often described him as humble, willing to work hard, but also vulnerable. That sense of vulnerability is key to understanding him. He needed acceptance and love, both personally and professionally, and it guided many of his decisions, sometimes to his detriment. By the turn of the 1980s, the broader cultural tapestry of America was shifting once again. Pop culture was embracing synthesizers, dance beats, and slick production. In country music, a so-called urban cowboy phenomenon had emerged, led by polished acts that appealed to crossover audiences. Yet there remained a hunger for a more traditional, emotional form of country, songs that spoke directly to heartbreak, everyday struggles, and the timeless themes that had always anchored the genre. Keith Whitley sensed this and began to wonder if his pure, heartfelt style might fit into mainstream country. Nashville, with its storied institutions and record labels, beckoned. He made the move, leaving behind the pure realm of bluegrass to pursue something bigger. At first, the transition wasn't smooth. Producers in Nashville sometimes wanted him to sing in a more commercial style, while Keith yearned to keep the raw, honest roots of his upbringing. A few early recordings didn't quite capture that perfect synergy, though the record executives still recognized his potential. It took a while for him to find the right team, people who truly understood his artistry and allowed him to blend the best of classic country with that intangible emotional current in his voice. It was around this time that fate steered him into a life-changing encounter with fellow country artist Lorrie Morgan. Lorrie, the daughter of singer George Morgan, was forging her own path in country music. When Keith and Lorrie met, sparks flew. They saw something in each other, a depth of passion for music, a yearning for emotional connection, and, in each other's eyes, a chance to build a life that was both personally and creatively fulfilling. Their chemistry was immediate and intense. It wasn't just about romance, it was about sharing the stage, writing songs, and finding comfort in someone who understood the complicated demands of the music industry. Their courtship was the stuff of fairy tales, or so it seemed. They married in 1986, and for a time, they looked like a power couple on the rise. Industry insiders saw them as the new golden duo, both incredibly talented, both with youthful energy, and both carrying a kind of reverence for country music's heritage. Fans gravitated to them, not just for their voices, but for the love story that was unfolding in public view. They had a son, Jesse Keith Whitley, adding a family dimension that people found relatable and endearing. Yet behind closed doors, Keith's struggles with alcohol were already casting a shadow. Lorrie Morgan, in numerous recollections, later described trying to help him, supporting him through attempts to quit, and agonizing over the hold this addiction had on him. It was heartbreaking because when Keith was sober, he was the embodiment of kindness, talent, and warmth. But the pull of the bottle often proved more powerful than logic or love. On some days, he could handle it. He'd have a drink or two without spiraling. On other days, especially when stress was high, a seemingly harmless night out could devolve into a binge that brought out all his insecurities and fears. Professionally, the late 80s were also his busiest. He released albums like LA to Miami, 1985, and Don't Close Your Eyes, 1988, showcasing a refined contemporary country sound without losing the emotional anchor of his Appalachian roots. Critics praised him as a breath of fresh air in a landscape that sometimes veered into artificial territory. His voice was real. It carried an ache you just couldn't fake, and audiences responded. The singles soared up the charts, and he quickly became a fixture at award shows, radio interviews, and tours. Country radio station DJs recognized that whenever they played one of Keith's ballads, phone lines lit up. One rarely mentioned aspect of this period is how Keith, for all his success, sometimes felt overwhelmed by the pressures of commercial stardom. He confided in close friends that he missed the simplicity of playing bluegrass with a few guys around a single mic, the spectacle of big tours, the obligations to record label executives, and the relentless schedule weighed on him. He was a sensitive soul who thrived on authentic connections, and the industry's demands often felt impersonal. When he struggled with those feelings, it was all too easy to retreat to a bottle. Yet for every dark moment, there were shining experiences he cherished. He discovered the thrill of hearing fans sing along to his songs, thousands of voices forming a choir of real emotion. He found joy in collaborating with other artists he admired, sometimes spending late-night hours in a studio in Nashville, where the creative sparks flew and no one watched the clock, And he glowed when Lorrie joined him for appearances, a testament to the shared life they were building. In scattered interviews, he expressed profound gratitude for everything he'd achieved, aware that many aspiring musicians never get that big break. He felt blessed, but also increasingly out of control. One lesser-known story from that era involves a last-minute performance Keith gave at a small club in rural Tennessee. The band playing that night recognized him in the audience and invited him to sing. Keith was in a relaxed mood, enjoying the atmosphere, and he accepted the invitation. People in the bar, astonished to see a rising country star walk onto their modest stage, fell silent as he began to sing. According to witnesses, he sang several classics, mixing in some of his own songs, and the whole place was spellbound. It was a spontaneous, magical moment that captured Keith's essence, a superstar who would step down from the big arenas to connect with everyday people on their level. Nobody who was there that night would ever forget it, but behind the scenes, the cracks continued to widen. Lorrie Morgan, pregnant with their daughter Morgan at one point, had her own career demands. She tried to manage her schedules to keep an eye on Keith. She'd worry when he was left to his own devices. Friends did what they could, but ultimately, an addict must choose recovery themselves. As Keith's fame soared, so did the internal turmoil that he tried to bury. Controversy and debate swirl around the circumstances of Keith Whitley's death. On May 9, 1989, at just 34 years old, he died from alcohol poisoning, leaving the country music world stunned. He'd been found at home, unresponsive. Many recall the frantic calls to emergency services, the rush of paramedics, and the horrifying moment when it dawned on everyone that it was too late. Some fans wondered if there was more to the story. Did he know it would happen that day? Was there an element of self-destructiveness at play? Or was it simply a tragic outcome of a disease that had tightened its grip over many years? Ultimately, while speculation has swirled, it's widely accepted that he was overcome by an addiction he couldn't conquer. News of his death ricocheted through Nashville and beyond. Radio stations paused their regular programming to honor him with tributes. Fans who had tickets to upcoming shows were devastated, struggling to reconcile how someone so vibrant and young could be gone so suddenly. And for Lorrie Morgan and the children, it was the shattering of a world they had built around love and shared artistic dreams. The tragedy was immeasurable. One day he was rehearsing songs, the next the country music community was mourning him. In the wake of this disaster, controversies emerged around how the industry handles addiction. Some critics argued that the high-stress environment and the social acceptance of heavy drinking in country music circles contributed to Keith's downfall. Others were quick to point out that plenty of stars faced the same pressures and overcame them. Why did Keith's story end so differently? The debate about personal responsibility versus the culture that enables self-destruction was hardly black and white. Yet many agreed that the tragedy of his passing might serve as a wake-up call for the industry to address issues of mental health and substance abuse more seriously. Another area of disagreement involved his legacy. Some fans felt Keith Whitley never quite got the recognition he deserved during his lifetime, overshadowed by bigger names with more extensive promotional backing. Others argued that he was on the verge of superstardom, that if he'd lived a few more years, he would have joined the pantheon of the greatest country singers of all time. Indeed, listening to his final recordings, you can hear an artist who was just hitting his stride, combining the depth of traditional country with a modern edge that felt fresh and timeless. It's easy to imagine he could have become a defining voice of the 1990s, right alongside major figures like Garth Brooks, Alan Jackson, Randy Travis, and Clint Black. Instead, his name became an eternal what if. In the months and years following his death, tributes poured in. Lorrie Morgan recorded songs in his memory, and other artists spoke publicly about Keith's influence on their own vocal styles. People shared anecdotes about jam sessions that never got recorded, or nights on a tour bus when Keith would explain a harmony line or break down the subtle differences in phrasing. A new generation of country singers found inspiration in his music, studying the soulful tension he could deliver with a single breath. He became a posthumous mentor of sorts, admired by those who recognized the sheer emotional potency in his recordings. If we look at the broader cultural impact of Keith Whitley's story, we see how it served as a pivot point. Country music in the early 1990s exploded with fresh faces who balanced tradition and innovation, drawing partly on Keith's example. Figures like Vince Gill have repeatedly cited Whitley as a major inspiration. Young artists realized you could honor the roots of country without sounding outdated. Keith's success laid a path for them. Fans craved authenticity, raw emotion, and real storytelling. His songs remain a testament that the best country music feels lived in and genuine. For some fans, Keith Whitley's tragedy underscores deeper lessons. It reminds us how addiction can lurk behind success, beauty, and creative genius. It's a haunting illustration of how external achievements don't always reflect internal peace. We might see a rising star, a chart-topping musician, but that doesn't reveal the battles waged every day within their heart and mind. The more we learn about Keith's private struggles, the more we realize how crucial it is for loved ones and communities to support each other, to create safe spaces for vulnerability, and to encourage those in pain to seek help. His death resonated as a sorrowful call for awareness around these issues, even if that call was only gradually heeded. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.